Good, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first session of the fourth day of the 2021 LD Conference on Linked Data. I'd like to welcome everybody who's part of the GLAM community and those who are not. We're all on this road together to make linked data universal. Anyway, my name is Paul Bethke. I work at the Iowa City Public Library as a cataloger, children's librarian, and a bookmobile driver, and I really enjoy that job. Before we get started, if you could check out the screen and see all the links to the various things you need to know about or have that will help you enjoy your conference even more. Before I continue, I would like to acknowledge gratitude for residents on the Sauk, Meskwaki, and Kickapoo historical lands. That's the main tribes in eastern Iowa, where I am currently from. Today's session is going to be a good one. It's a BIBFRAME 100 from the panel discussion from the folks at Library of Congress. Today we have presenting first Judith Cannon, Sally McCallum, and Paul Frank. And I'll give a quick bio of each of those right now. Judith Cannon joined the Library of Congress staff over 45 years ago and has held several positions at LC. In June 2019, she was appointed Chief of the Policy, Training, and Cooperative Programs Division, which manages LCHS, LCC, to Library of Congress standards, classification web, catalogers desktop, descriptive policy, on-the-job training for staff in the library collections and services group, manages the program for cooperative cataloging, secretariat, and provides support and training to those working in BIBFRAME editor. That's a lot of stuff going on. Thank you for doing that, Judith. Next up is for Sally. She is the Chief of Network Development and MARC Standards at the Office of the Library of Congress. Her office maintains the MARC formats, has spearheaded the development of the Bibliographic Framework Initiative, BIBFRAME of course, and is also engaged in XML, RDF, representations of other widely used bibliographic standards, the Library of Congress Linked Data Service, id.loc.gov, and pilot projects using the BIBFRAME ontology are primary ongoing projects in her office. She has a lot more under her belt as well. I could spend probably the next half hour just describing all the cool things and awards she has won. So awesome person there. And the last person is Paul Frank. He is the Catalog Policy Specialist in the Policy Training and Cooperative Programs Division at the Library of Congress. He assists the Library of Congress BIBFRAME pilot as a trainer and a training developer. Now, without further ado, I will turn it on over to Judith to begin this program.
Sorry, I'm unmuting myself. Okay, before I start today, I want to run through a couple of slides and then tell you a little story that occurred this week. So we're going to be addressing BIBFRAME 100 at the Library of Congress today. And they're going to be the three of us, and I'm leading off. And you've already been introduced to us, so you know who we are, and now you can see our faces, so you will be seeing more of them as we go through the presentation. So I will be addressing why BIBFRAME 100. And Sally will be addressing it from a technology point of view, which is absolutely critical to BIBFRAME 100. And then Paul is going to demo the new BIBFRAME editor. So in preparing for this presentation, I had wanted to say, oh, BIBFRAME 100 was like launching BIBFRAME, or it was the implementation of BIBFRAME. And I was corrected by several people. Now, you might ask, why did Judith Cannon want to say that it was implemented or it was a launch? Well, I'm not exactly in my youth, and retirement's looming on the horizon, and you always want to feel that you've reached some kind of milestone. And so I had sort of incorrectly thought you can put a benchmark on BIBFRAME, but you can't. And after the discussion with NetDev this week, I started to sit down and think about BIBFRAME and where it had gone and what had happened over the last few years. And I want to talk a little bit about that before I get into BIBFRAME 100. I first got involved in BIBFRAME in January 2014 at ALA Midwinter in Philly. And Paul Frank and I did a demo of BIBFRAME in the LC booth, and it was a major hit. Now, it was extremely primitive. I mean, really primitive, the BIBFRAME editor. But no matter how primitive it was, it seemed to really excite the library community. By 2015, we were in BIBFRAME pilot #1 with about 50 staff in LC experimenting with the BIBFRAME editor and guiding and advising the NDMSO staff on how to improve it. Now, I do want to say something here that this was my first experience of working with programmers and developers on a major IT product. I had no idea until I started working with them how difficult the task was. I just don't think I could possibly, without working with them, imagine the complexity of what was facing us. So then along came BIBFRAME pilot #2, where we introduced 50 more people to the BIBFRAME, working in the BIBFRAME editor. And in between all of this, LC launched ID.gov, which is a linked data database. And so what they said to me on Tuesday and made me do all this reflection is that the introduction of linked data to the library community is a series of milestones that are achieved. And looking back, I realized that pilot #1, pilot #2, ID.gov are all major milestones. And another one was the new BIBFRAME editor that was rolled out this year that Paul Frank will be demoing. So now, having told you that, I want you to know that I'm now not looking for a launch or an implementation date for linked data. I'm just looking at it with milestones. And what milestone do I want it to reach before I retire? So it makes trying to find a retirement date much easier. So let's get started on BIBFRAME 100. BIBFRAME 100 doesn't mean, and I want this to be very clear, that 100% of the catalogers in the Library of Congress will be cataloging in the BIBFRAME editor. What it means is that 100% of those that can work in the BIBFRAME editor will be working in the BIBFRAME editor. There are others that we're not ready to put them in to the BIBFRAME editor. For instance, the serial catalogers, a lot's got to be worked out before we can bring serial catalogers in. There are some special formats that it's not going to be possible to bring into the BIBFRAME 100 at the moment. Now, why has it been called BIBFRAME 100? This term was coined by NDMSO, and it's a ready reference. And what it means is that 100% of those that can catalog in BIBFRAME editor will be brought into working in the BIBFRAME editor. It does mean too that LC will be teaching the catalogers the official RDA toolkit using the BIBFRAME editor. Now, of course, that will be the 100% of the catalogers that can work in the BIBFRAME editor will be taught the official RDA toolkit using the BIBFRAME editor. Now, why are we doing this? When the original RDA toolkit was rolled out, we all knew it wasn't entirely suited to MARC, but the library community had barely put its toe into the waters of linked data. So we had no choice. We had to teach the original RDA toolkit in MARC. And it wasn't the easiest thing to do because it's not ideally suited to MARC. If you think the original RDA toolkit wasn't suited to MARC, the official RDA toolkit is even more centered on linked data. We at the Library of Congress have had an enormous benefit. We were asked by the ALA to input the policy statements for the PCC and the Library of Congress into the RDA toolkit. And in doing that and thinking about how to write metadata guidance documents, it became very apparent to us how difficult it's going to be to introduce people to the official RDA toolkit in a MARC environment. And so, knowing this, I put forward a proposal. I proposed to upper level management that we seriously consider moving all of the staff that could be moved into BIBFRAME before we had to teach them the official RDA toolkit. I didn't want to be in a situation where we taught the staff the official RDA toolkit in MARC first and let them get used to that, and then to turn around a few months later and say to them, okay, now we're going to teach you the official RDA toolkit in the BIBFRAME editor. It seemed to me that that would be extremely stressful for the catalogers. I also knew that we had said in PCC that we would not launch the RDA toolkit until the official RDA toolkit until after July 2022 or July 2022. That meant that we at the Library of Congress would probably, with our over 6 overseas offices, be involved in training staff in the official RDA toolkit for 6 to 9 months. Then we would have to get them comfortable in the official RDA toolkit before we could move them into the BIBFRAME editor. So with my calculations, I realized that moving them into resource description and access would be, in the BIBFRAME editor, wouldn't probably take place until 2023. That seemed an awfully long way away to me, because you have to remember that we started the first pilot early in about April 2015. We're now at 7.5 years of being in a pilot mode. But I will say this much. When we reach the milestone of BIBFRAME 100, we'll be leaving the pilot. So this will be a huge step forward. So BIBFRAME first equals BIBFRAME 100. In other words, if we're going to be teaching BIBFRAME first, then we're in BIBFRAME 100 before we introduce the official resources description and access toolkit. And it spaces out the training. But I do have to say this, that before we can teach BIBFRAME 100, there are some essential requirements that have to be in place. Now, Sally McCallum will be talking to you about those essential requirements because they're all technical and this is her field. But I do want to say one thing about this. Right now, those persons that are working in the pilot and have been, some of them, since 2015, they have been doing their cataloging in the BIBFRAME editor and then recreating the record in the ILS Voyager in MARC. So they've been doing double cataloging. We cannot possibly move 100% of the catalogers that could work in the BIBFRAME editor into it if they have to do double cataloging. And so Sally McCallum will be telling you about what essential requirements have to be met in order for us to start training them in BIBFRAME. The advantage of this is that we're going to be spacing out the BIBFRAME training and the official RDA toolkit training. So when we're training them in the BIBFRAME editor, they'll still be consulting the original RDA toolkit. They will not be in the official RDA toolkit. So they'll already be with RDA and they will be learning to work in BIBFRAME editor. So that changes the situation. So RDA second equals RDA and BIBFRAME. Now, I do want to say that why I want BIBFRAME first is for two reasons. One is to ease the burden on the catalogers, but the second reason is a more selfish one. I know that RDA is better suited to BIBFRAME, and I want BIBFRAME first and RDA second. And so I was absolutely elated when I submitted my proposal that management agreed with it. So whenever PCC decides that it's going to implement the official RDA toolkit, July 2022 or later, we will commence training staff in the RDA toolkit, but we will be training them to in the BIBFRAME environment. Now, we will still have to offer a few classes in MARC, and we know this because we're going to have, for instance, all the serial catalogers unable to enter BIBFRAME right away. And that we also recognize that all the staff at LC are going to have for some years to come, a thorough knowledge of MARC. MARC is not going away, and we know that. But if we can move 100% of the catalogers that can work in MARC, in BIBFRAME, into it, we will have BIBFRAME as the predominant environment in LC and not MARC, but we won't be letting go of MARC. And I want to assure you that MARC is there, and MARC is there to stay for some years to come. Now I'm going to hand it over to Sally to tell you about the technical requirements.
Okay, thank you, Judith. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I guess I'll presume you can.
Yes, I can hear you, Sally.
Someone will tell me if you can. Everybody who has been through this year of Zoom knows what it's like to start to talk and find out they've been mute the whole time. Okay, so Judith has given you our motivation for BIBFRAME 100, and the challenges of training for BIBFRAME and RDA at the same time. The decision to move more aggressively was made actually last year. It was time to move from pilot to production and eliminate that double keying we've been doing. However, we needed to enhance the BIBFRAME system in order to go from 100 catalogers working 2 days a week to 350 catalogers working 5 days a week. And that was a challenge. So we began to rework the components of the system piece by piece. In coordination with Judith, who said that milestones were sort of what she thought we ought to be seeking, our first milestone was our infrastructure and file configuration changes. It involved the basic system that we use. Fortunately, earlier this year, we had already begun to the transition, earlier last year rather, the transition from an internal servers to the cloud, to AWS. This was not easy. It took us 8 to 10 months, but we were trying to not disrupt the pilot catalogers at the same time we did it, and we accomplished this last fall. Our platform for the system is MARC. And it's a flexible NoSQL platform that has been under development for new systems for over 10 years. We were doing an upgrade, so we started to test the upgrade that we would be doing, we needed to do from MARC 8 to MARC 10. And the BIBFRAME software that sits on MARC also needed to be overhauled. Our BIBFRAME system has grown piece by piece, and starting with ID, which is the public access module that has offered LCSH and NACO names for 10 years now. And then there was the BIBFRAME cataloger work, which sits on a sister application that calls on ID, but we needed better integration between these two. So we have been working on a merger of those two systems. That has been a very large task, but it will also enable us to have a more efficient system. We expect to move to MARC 10 in the next month, actually the middle of next month. And at the same time, we will have merged the two files that we keep. This fundamental work has been spearheaded by people in our office, Nate Trail and Kevin Ford, who in coordination, close coordination with our IT department. Next. Another major milestone was a redevelopment of our BIBFRAME editor. We had a design developed by the catalogers, really, with experience, who had experience with the original editor, and with the guidance of a contractor who has very good UX experience or very good interface experience. We took the cataloger's design, and Matt Miller in our office has created a new editor. This has been going on, as it says on the screen. The original design was done in early 2020, and we have, and by early 2021, we had the editor almost finished. After a lot of testing all spring, it was released to the pilot catalogers on June the 1st. And of course, changes and bugs have been articulated by them. Catalogers are not shy. They know what they want. They know what they need. And so we've had enhanced releases about every week since then. Paul Frank will give you more details about the editor following this presentation. We now have a contract also underway for to work again with the catalogers to have so that they can tell us what the searches and how they want their screen, the displays of records to be. We have those, we have that in the system now, but we want to see what kind of enhancements we should make to searching, what kinds of enhancements we should make to displays that would make cataloger work more efficient. Okay. Now, a key milestone is assuring the adequacy of conversions from MARC to BIBFRAME and conversions from BIBFRAME to MARC. We know we will be in a mixed environment for a long time. We have many modules that are MARC-based. We have many modules that we will increasingly have modules that are BIBFRAME-based. We are creating a new record. We are creating a new record creation system, a new backend, but our ILS public catalog will remain in Voyager for now. So BIBFRAME descriptions must be able to convert to MARC and satisfy that ILS. This sounds like a simple task, but has been a monster, frankly. MARC has gone through so much in the last 50 years. It had to accommodate multiple cataloging conventions. There was enormous growth of the files, which made it difficult when changes were made to the format or changes were made to conventions or policies. It made it difficult to make the change in the file. So the files represent different eras, actually. And the latest rules, RDA, brought on a new layer and a disruptive layer of complexity. Meanwhile, BIBFRAME was developed with a focus on RDA, i.e. the first RDA, with awareness of MARC experience. So it tried to blend, it tried to ease the path from the MARC record to a BIBFRAME record. So in the next, go ahead and do the next slide, Paul, thank you. So what we're seeing is that adjustments may be necessary to some of our cherished conventions. We first developed the MARC to BIBFRAME. That was relatively easy given we wanted to simplify. Then we developed BIBFRAME to MARC, which was relatively hard since we had tried to simplify when we went into BIBFRAME. And leave behind some of these, some practices that were from earlier cataloging rules, from earlier conventions and ways of doing things. Now we do the two in tandem. That's not easy. If we do changes to BIBFRAME to MARC, we then look over at MARC to BIBFRAME to see if that needs to be adjusted. If we do changes in MARC to BIBFRAME, that will help the BIBFRAME to MARC, then we do adjustments there. Jody Williamson will be giving more details on this issue in the next session after this one in the LD4 series. Another milestone was data exchange. So we updated the vocabulary in the last few months. The vocabulary for BIBFRAME. We kept it steady for the last few years as we and others attempted implementations. And you can't do the implementations if the vocabulary keeps changing under you. So we kept it steady. We encouraged people, and we did it ourselves, to develop their own little namespace, and where anything they had to change or wanted to be different, they could do it there. And then they could, after they had proven that the change was useful and was broadly useful, they could suggest it as a change to the vocabulary. And we have continued to do that ourselves. In BFLC, there are some things that we put in there that we finally concluded we didn't like. they didn't work well, we wouldn't take them any further, and we get rid of them within our data. The BIBFRAME descriptions distribution service for BIBFRAME descriptions is in the works now. We have a contractor working on on that, and it will be, I think, become available by the end of the year, we hope. We are also looking at the BIBFRAME description change notification process. We've had Atom feeds for that for 10 years now, and we will probably we will be converting that to a new underlying architecture in the near future, probably next month. And then there are additional issues when we run out of things to do. We need new processes, maybe for name authorities or not. We need new processor subjects or not. It depends on how much time, how much we can devote to these. CONSER and other long-standing cooperative programs need careful attention, and the BIBFRAME hubs need to be introduced into the MARC environment, and there are obviously more. So, looking forward to 2022, we would like to have BIBFRAME100 behind us. We hope that we'll be there by the end of the year. We want to, however, start to explore discovery more and what RDF can deliver to us that is new in the discovery environment. We have not done much with discovery. LD4, I believe, in their grants have done more than we at the Library of Congress have, but we're looking forward to being able to exploit this RDF data. We're looking forward to maybe working with some vendors who want to implement BIBFRAME or adapt some of the modules that we have to their systems. So we're looking forward to being freed up and able to work with anyone who wants to do that. We make all of our modules available and downloadable, but that it's not easy to simply download and start to use it. It takes working with the originator of the system, of the module. And then there will be lots of adjustments to BIBFRAME100, I am sure, this next year. So with that, thank you. And a couple of footnotes to remind you that BIBFRAME100's scope is to change the cataloging input process. It's a first step in the use of BIBFRAME, not a full ILS conversion. And the spec and software for BIBFRAME100 components are made available from the BIBFRAME website as they are released or updated. But since we will be aggressively adjusting them for the remainder of the year, if you are using any of those, you may want to keep your eye on the website where we have those modules available, so that you can keep up with what we are doing, because we do have to aggressively adjust them to make them work for BIBFRAME100. So thank you very much. And I now turn it over to Paul, who will give you more information about the editor.
Thanks, Sally. Thanks, Judith, for the introduction. Okay, so I'm going to show you the new editor. I'm doing this live, so there might be pitfalls along the way, things that have stage fright as we go along. But I have to say, of all of the pilot participants, and especially the ones who have been in the pilot since 2015, I think we are most excited about this new development in BIBFRAME, this new editor, because when we started the pilot in 2015, we had a really low bar for what we were trying to achieve. We just wanted to see if descriptions could be described using an editor, a BIBFRAME editor. And of course, catalogers being the way they are and very interested in the process, over time, more and more things were added to this original editor that we were using, and the editor could accommodate it. But the architecture of the editor was really limited. And although we could accommodate all the needed RDA elements and things that needed to be added throughout the process of the BIBFRAME pilots, we knew that the editor was sort of starting to bust at the seams and we needed to have a new editor. So as Sally mentioned, so much of the work that has led us to this new editor that you see on the screen now is the responsive design process, and through interviews with the pilot participants about what was needed. This is the result of that. And as Sally also said, that, you know, it's going through many updates, many iterations. In fact, if you look down here at the bottom of this screen, we're at version 0.6.7, and the editor has only been in use since June. So that's a lot of responsive design too. And Matt Miller is constantly working on it with the participants and responding to their needs. So I want to just do a little tour of it, and then I'm going to try to describe a resource. It won't be a complex one. It will be relatively easy, but my main goal is to give you a view of the interface and what BIBFRAME pilot workers are seeing. Now, when I go to the editor, I'll be asked to log in, and this is not a controlled login, but I need to give my credentials so that the editor will understand the descriptions that I created and assign them to me. You can see, let me try to close this here. So you can see username here in this column in P. Frank. This is my Windows login, my Windows ID that I use when I access the editor. And again, if you go to the bottom of the screen, it says you're logged in as P. Frank. So I could change that, or someone else could use this same laptop that I'm using if they want to log in to see their descriptions. But the default view when you log in is this header called My Records, and you look over here to the right, and it mimics what you see in the column here on the left. But what is most important to know about this is that these are what are called unposted records. This is my sandbox. This is my workspace. So I am working on descriptions daily. I start something, I think about it at night, I'm trying to come up with a good subject access for it. You know, I'm not ready to produce the description. I'm still working on it. So it stays in my local workspace. So everything that you see here is a description that I have been working on that's not available in the BIBFRAME database. I have not pushed any of these descriptions to the BIBFRAME database. Now, if I want to work on a description further in the BIBFRAME editor, I can just go over to click load here. And this function will bring it into the editor. It will not do anything in the distribution database. This is still my sandbox that I'm working in. Now, everything that you see here is mine that I've worked on and has my ID, but I can also see everyone's record. And here you see, when you look under the user ID, you see all sorts of other names. Now, why would I want to have access to someone else's work in progress? Well, in many cases, I might do descriptive elements in a resource, and then I need help with the subject, or I need help with the classification. So I need to be able to access the record that someone else might have worked on preliminarily so that I can continue the description. And then that other person can take and can further work on the description. So it's very, it's a universal shared file here within this sandbox or this workspace environment where everyone in the working in the BIBFRAME editor can access others' work as well if needed. The next feature when you go down on the left side is create a new record. And I'm not going to create a new one. I'm going to actually show you how I can pull an existing description in from the distribution file, from the BIBFRAME database, and work on it there. But if I were starting with an original description, I would choose one of the templates here. And here's a perfect example of this responsive design. Now, one of the observations that the trainers made when we were teaching BIBFRAME is that catalogers were so tied to the MARC description, and the MARC description is a very flat description. And even though we were working with RDA as our cataloging code, often catalogers would have a very hard time understanding what was a work attribute, what was an expression attribute, what was a manifestation attribute within the MARC record, because there's no distinction there. So you really need to understand the cataloging code in order to say, hey, well, this field in MARC actually is an attribute of work in RDA or in Ferber, or this MARC field is an attribute of expression in RDA. So that was a big part of our training in understanding how this flat MARC record is sort of exploded into separate entities. And in RDA, it would be work, expression, manifestation, and item. But in BIBFRAME, it would be work, instance, and item. So we wanted to focus on that distinction. So when you go to the create new record or new description here, and you decide on the template that you want to use, you have work with a symbol associated with it to show that, yeah, remember this circular sort of aqua color will always be reflective of work attributes or work elements. And then for instance, this diamond shaped sort of purplish will always be instance. And this is sort of just a reinforcement of the importance in linked data of understanding the ontologies and how these things are actually different. Even though we're describing a comprehensive resource, what we're putting into that description really can relate to other entities depending on the ontology or the vocabulary that you're using. So the next button down is load existing record. And I thought this might be the most useful thing to demo. And I want to make sure I'm doing okay on time. So now when I go to this link, load existing record, you can see there's a hyperlink to BFDB. Now BFDB means BIBFRAME database. So here's what I want to do. I think a lot of you work with ECIP, electronic cataloging publication materials, where you'll see a preliminary description made for a resource based on information that a publisher supplies to the agency. And then when the actual resource is published, a print copy, if it's a print resource, is sent to the agency. And then at the Library of Congress, at least, we have a process called SIP verification, where we take the printed resource and we compare the data elements in it against what was in the preliminary SIP record, SIP description. And primarily what we're doing is just verifying access points, and we're adding pagination and extent and all the descriptive details that you would do. So I thought I would use an example of that and show you, if I go to the BIBFRAME database, I'm totally outside of the editor now. What you see now is the database. This is where live materials are, where published, posted materials from the workspace appear, where catalogers are done with them. They're out there for the public, for anyone to access. So I'm going to use LCCN. That's a traditionally powerful search, because it's a unique identifier, and it will pull up a very limited result list. And of course, you could search. All possible searches are available in the BIBFRAME database. So you can see that there right on the screen, but I'm going to target this specific one by LCCN and search it. And I see I get 4 results. Okay, this is great. It'd be nicer if I just got two, a work and an instance, but in this case I got four, and you'll notice that they're identified, they're labeled by their entity. This is an instance, two instances, a work record, and two works. So why would I get two instances and two works by using one LCCN? Well, the reason is that this description, and this is the one I want, we're going to call up this instance here. It has the name Introducing RDA, a Guide to the Basics After 3R. It's a new publication, just came out. It was written by Chris Oliver, and she has given me permission to use this and show it to you. In this SIP, Cataloging and Publication description, there is a reference to an online version. So we have the print version and the online version. And so that's why in that result list, we saw two instances. Those would be the two, one for the print, one for the online, and two instances of works. Now, Sally mentioned BIBFRAME hubs. Now, this is an area where a hub might be helpful to say, well, we really only have one work, but we have two instances appended to that. But right now, because all of our MARC data in our bibliographic file has been transferred into the BIBFRAME database as linked data, it's done automatically. It's not done by cataloger review. So there are always refinements that need to be made to that process. But if you look at this description on the left within the BIBFRAME database, you'll see that, for example, the extent is not completed because this is basically the publisher data that was sent to us. And let's say that I have the print resource now in hand and I want to do this SIP verification process to complete the description. I can pull this description into the editor. And if you look over here, I have two options. We have an existing editor, the one that we've used since 2015, that's still available. We will deprecate it, but before the new editor was released, this was the only option. Of course, we didn't call it the old editor. We had to distinguish between old and new. But now I want to pull this description into the new editor. So I'm going to click on edit using new editor, and then through sort of an artificial intelligence type, or maybe that's a little bit glamorous to describe it as AI, but really what it does, the BIBFRAME editor is looking at the data elements in that description and making a best guess as to the resource type. And so it gives you a selection of profiles, and every one of these really is for a monograph. I'm going to go ahead and choose a simple monograph here, and this will pull the description into the editor. So this is what a cataloger sees. And this is a perfect example of the responsive design, because what catalogers found very troublesome in the original editor was constantly having to scroll. We had a very long profile for all of the resources that we described, and there was a lot of mousing and scrolling that was necessary. But now you can sort of take shortcuts. And you'll see here, wherever you have a check mark, that means that there's data in that area of the description. When you see just a bullet, that's something that doesn't have data, but you could click on it and you'll be taken right to it in case you want to add something. So this is a wonderful responsive design that allows catalogers to do very minimal scrolling and just to click to find what they want. Another example of the design is on the right-hand side. Now notice this icon here, this circular icon with that sort of teal color. That's that color recognition that you're working with a work record here, not an instance. This is a work description. And along the right-hand side is a sort of a preview of the data elements that are in this description. And this is critical because catalogers over and over again wanted to see something, and I totally understand this as a cataloger myself. You want to review what you're doing. You want to make sure that you've done everything right. And so you can do that quickly by just scrolling through this part of the editor. You don't have to go clicking from box to box here in the input area. You can actually scroll through here, and here's the instance area. So it's a wonderful feature, and catalogers I find use this quite a bit. And we made it very clear from the beginning of the pilot that you really don't need to be able to interpret the RDF that's underlying a description. That's used by machine. It helps to know what it is, but really for cataloging purposes, you just want to make sure that the data is correct. And you can do that easily by scrolling along here. Now, I see that I'm running a little bit short on time, so I will just talk through a couple of things here. In creator of work, we see Oliver Chris, 1951, and you'll see a check mark here. And if I hover over that check mark, it's going to say heading is valid. That means this is a valid heading in the LC NACO authority file. It doesn't say that this is the correct Chris Oliver. So if I want to verify that it is, I can click on it and click on view entity, and I'll be taken outside of RDA again, out of the editor again. And now I'm in id.loc.gov, the linked data service, where I can verify that this is the correct person for the resource that I'm describing. So let's this out of the way. Okay, there it is. So I'm going to say that, okay, I'm good with this. I've determined that this is the person. Another thing I could do, let me just show you quickly. If, let's say I didn't have a name here and I wanted to look up someone, I could go to a new person and I could search Wikidata. I could search the LC name authority file. It's really up to the designers of and to policy as to what files you can search against. And I noticed that Chris Oliver also has a name authority record or an item actually in Wikidata. So I could look that up as well and pull it up and show you that. So this is another example of really identity management in action rather than authority control, because you have the option to search other files. And when PCC sort of catches up with this and says, okay, we will not restrict descriptive access points to only the LC name authority file, why can't we include other files, ISNI, Wikidata? When we finally get to that step, then we can say that we truly are in an identity management environment for authority work. Okay, so basically I can scroll through, verify that everything in the description is okay. If I want to, you know, this little box doesn't show everything, I can just pull on the box and expand it to make sure that the contents are correct against the resource, the summary is correct. The last thing I want to show you quickly is subjects, and I won't give a demo here because it will just take a little bit too much time, but this is an area that we really are focusing on. And this has been an issue, a concern all along with the LCSH structure of allowing headings and subdivisions often to be authorized but not represented by authority records because of free-floating practices. And Matt Miller, who designed this editor and is working with the participants, has done some incredible work that allows you to build complex subject strings and input them into the editor through a lookup box that catalogers have found very helpful. There's still some refinements. My hope is that someday maybe we can just start keying in the strings. You know, so many of us who work with LCSH and keep up with it know exactly without looking it up whether a string is valid. Just start keying in that string and have an automatic validation take place as I start keying it in. I think that would be a great time saver, but we're working on things like that. So the only thing I wanted to do here after I verified that everything is correct is go down to the instance description, which you see here, and all I would need to do is verify that the place of publication, the publisher date is correct, and then finally input my extent, fill in the pages, the illustrations, the size of it, and then I'm done. And I'm going to say, okay, well, I've got a complete description and I'm ready to either save it and come back to it if I want to double check my work, or post it. And if I'm going to be an optimistic cataloger and say that everything here is great, it's exactly what I needed to do. My job is done. I click on post, and this will actually post the record to the BIBFRAME database. And so I can access any of the descriptions that I've worked on by clicking on one of these. So that is a very brief, I'd love to do more, but I see the time is running short. And I will just close by saying that I love this new editor. And I think this is the editor we'll use for BIBFRAME 100. And I think it's perfectly capable of getting us through all that training and that move to BIBFRAME 100. So I'm very excited to share this with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, Sally, and Judith. That was a lot of material in a very short period of time. I agree, we could have gone much longer. I've talked with the other hosts for this particular session, and we're going to extend it to about a quarter after the hour, about 15 minutes beyond, because we do have quite a few questions in the Q&A waiting to be addressed. For this part, I'm going to turn it over to the chat moderator, who is Paloma Graciani Picardo, and she will take it from there. Off to you, Paloma.
Thanks, Paul. So let's see, because we have a few questions here. So I'm going to start reading them from, people can avoid them, so I'm going to start reading the ones that have more votes to it. The first one, is it possible to say something about complex subject headings in the BIBFRAME format? What is the best way to find information about how to handle subject headings using subdivisions in the BIBFRAME format? And I know, Paul, that you were already talking a little bit about it, but I don't know if you would like to say more.
Sure, of course I can. Yeah, it's complex, not only in LCSH the way it works, but also in BIBFRAME, because when you look up, remember, for every subdivision record that's used in LCSH, there's a corresponding authority record for that subdivision. And they're often, a subdivision record will be identical to a topical heading, which is in the same form. So catalogers never really needed to understand that distinction. All they needed to know was that you would use a subfield X or subfield V for the subdivision, but you would use a subfield A for the topical. But now in the BIBFRAME editor, the way Matt has configured it, when you're looking up these components, it's very important to be sure that you pick the correct one. So for example, one of the ones I was going to demonstrate was the use of the subdivision standards. It was cataloging standards as the subject access point for the resource that I was working with. Well, of course, cataloging is a topical heading, but standards is not only a subdivision record, it's also a general C reference, a 260 field that you would see in MARC. So you have to be very careful to pick the correct, the subdivision record and not the general C reference record, because they both appear in the lookups. I will say for subject work, there's a lot of work still to be done. We have options for faceting. I think that might be in a linked data environment, maybe a much more conducive linked data friendly way to describe resources with facets and rather than complex pre-coordinated strings. I also think that we need to increase the amount of the speed in which these can be put into the record, because when we're describing them in BIBFRAME now, we're actually validating as we go along, and we're not waiting for a final validation at the end. You're actually doing the validation check as you do it. So it can slow things down. But maybe the quick answer would be that from a linked data perspective, I think faceting is a much more helpful approach and certainly much faster.
That makes a lot of sense, and I'm very happy to hear you saying that. The next question, okay, will LC be utilizing Sinopia? And if not, why not? And there's a related question, what do you see is the relationship interplay between the BIBFRAME editor and Sinopia?
I don't know who. Am I?
I don't know that it's who is this addressed? So whoever
No.
it is.
I'm sorry. No, I didn't know who was going to answer that of the three of us. But we work very closely with LD4 and with Stanford with the Sinopia activity. And those are two editors. I hope that 5 years from now, there will be 5 editors out there. I mean, it does not need, should not be one editor and one idea, because as you develop different ones, different ideas emerge. So that said, our editor is for the Library of Congress for one institution, and it's made efficient for that. Whereas the Sinopia editor has a much more complex task. It has to be the editor that serves a number of institutions. We don't envy what they've had to do to work on that editor. So I don't know if that answers your question. I see there's another question about the new editor in MarcLogic, something that the editor is not in MarcLogic. The editor posts its records to MarcLogic, but it is a completely separate entity. And in fact, the software is available on GitHub all the time. We have put it out for the last 6 months probably on GitHub. So it can be utilized, it can be taken, the software it can be adapted to whatever your system is. We didn't have to customize anything in MarcLogic, because in fact, it simply sends something to MarcLogic, and that's the system that expected to receive it.
Thanks so much, Sally, for answering both questions in one. And I think that this kind of also address one of the questions that is on the chat. Is the BIBFRAME editor open source for others to use?
Yes, it is available, and I'll put that on the slide. If you go to the, let me think. I think if you go to the BIBFRAME website, someplace on that site, it will give you the link to the GitHub location where the editor software sits. It's not we have our own version internally, but a copy of that software is on GitHub.
Thank you, Sally. Yeah, I bet somebody can put that on drop that link on the chat while we are talking here. The next question, if I understand correctly, BIBFRAME is more focused on bibliographic records. If LC is 100% transitioning to BIBFRAME, how will you handle other type of records, like order, item, holdings, etc.? Who wants to take that one?
I can take it.
Yes, good.
I try to make it very clear. It's only 100% of the catalogers that can work in the BIBFRAME editor that will go into it. We know that that there is going to be a cluster of catalogers that cannot be moved into BIBFRAME 100. And the BIBFRAME 100 is a ready reference for meaning that 100% of the catalogers that can be moved into BIBFRAME will be moved into BIBFRAME. Now, I noticed a question that came in about, what date, when is this taking place? What is the exact date that this is happening? There isn't a date, because as Sally pointed out, certain things have to be in place before we can move into BIBFRAME 100. And one of the important things about moving to BIBFRAME 100 is that the catalogers that can be moved into BIBFRAME must only have to create one record. They cannot be doing double cataloging as they're doing now. Now they're doing double cataloging. They create a record in the BIBFRAME editor, then they turn around and they create a MARC record. And that just won't work, that double cataloging. So there's no fixed date for moving into BIBFRAME 100. And it will not be all the catalogers at the Library of Congress. It will only be those that we know can work in BIBFRAME.
I don't want to say something about what Judith said, but I see on the question that says, do people outside of LC have access to the BibFrame editor? Actually, if I answered that yes, they could get the software, they cannot access inside the Library of Congress, inside our firewall. And so they cannot access the editor at LC. So I want to be sure that was clear. They can download the software that we keep out on GitHub.
Thanks for clarifying, Sally. So the next question, are there catalogers who have struggled to transition to BIBFRAME? And I think that's, Judith, you were talking a little bit about it before, but the question is what's happening to them? And talking about LC catalogers. So are they still going to be working on MARC, which I'm assuming, but at what point they will have to do the transition?
Until we're ready and we've got the right kind of conversion, they will be working in MARC. But even after we've moved those that we can move into BIBFRAME100, they're still going to be seeing MARC records. A lot of the catalogers also do acquisitions work. They're going to be doing that work using MARC. The OPAC will still be a MARC OPAC. So we recognize that staff are going to be working in it. And I think Sally said this, probably for a good 15 years yet. And so this is why the movement of the library community into linked data is really a series of milestones. There isn't any particular launch date. There isn't an implementation date. We're going to get there incrementally through achieving various milestones along the way. Is that the answer they were looking for?
I will assume it is and move to the next one. So I'm seeing here a good one. Do you have any idea of how this new BIBFRAME editor and the work being done to improve it will support extensions to the BIBFRAME ontology? Maybe this is already a simple thing to do.
I think I might be able to answer that one. And there was a wonderful presentation yesterday at this conference by Nancy Lorimer and Kevin Kishimoto about the medium of performance ontology. And that is certainly something that can be added to the BIBFRAME editor. Of course, it's a policy decision on how we do it. And we are using a simplified version of the POM in PMO in our BIBFRAME descriptions. Another initiative was a couple of years ago with the art and rare materials ontology extension, and that also is compatible with the editor. There's so much that when Sally talked about MARC and how it's grown over time, the growth of BIBFRAME and BIBFRAME ontologies and related ontologies is much more organic. And they all fit together much better than the way MARC has grown over time with changes made to the format that often were sort of had to be shoehorned into it. Whereas in this newer environment with linked data, it's very easy to add extensions.
Thanks, Paul. We have another question here. Can you say something about how item description, barcodes, etc. is connected to BIBFRAME in your database? And do you foresee using a linked data representation of item information, which can include item level description fields that are currently in MARC records?
Well, this is Paul again. One of the things we observed is that there's a very fluid line between the different entities. And when someone's working with a MARC record, what often would be a data element that they might not be aware would be associated with a work, for example, often there's a need to record certain types of data elements at the instance level or at the item level. So we're still experimenting with that. We haven't done too much work with item records. We have the profiles for them, and catalogers can input barcodes and put the administrative metadata that they would normally put into an item. But my feeling is that for acquisitions and for cataloging inventory purposes, we probably will still use the MARC descriptions for holdings and items for a while. But that's just based on my experience. So Sally or Judith might have different feelings about that.
Thanks so much, Paul. That was very interesting to hear. We have 5 minutes, so I'm going to ask 2 more questions. Will coding to replace MARC for authorities be developed in BIBFRAME, or will RDA elements be used for describing RDA agent, persons, etc. entities, or will something else be done?
We have our authorities in RDF, and that's the BIBFRAME system interacts with the name authority system in RDF in ID at this time. I don't know. I don't know what the. I don't know if that completely answers Stephen's question, but it right now it is. We are. I mean, the authorities.
I guess what
does them in MARC, and then we convert them into RDF.
If I understand correctly, Stephen is talking about RDA elements from the RDA ontology.
Paul, do you want to?
Yes, I'll answer that. Yes, we are. The overarching principle here with what we're doing is that we need to be able to apply RDA as our cataloging code in a linked data environment. So in describing an agent, we would use all of the attributes or elements that are appropriate now for that agent and the official RDA or original RDA attributes for now. And we'll superimpose the policies of NACO, where conflict resolution and what needs to be added. So really, it's just the carrier of the data can change. It could be MADS RDF, it could be MARC, it could be something else, but the data itself is according to RDA.
Thank you, Paul. Well, one more question. I understand that catalogers won't be double keying, but when those who can move into BIBFRAME 100, will the records these catalogers create simply be translated into MARC for the Voyager database and then have holdings and items attached to them? So I guess you guys have already talked about that. It's just probably to confirm, this person tries to confirm that that's what you guys have said.
Well, I'll take a stab at that, or it looks like maybe Judith wanted to.
Go ahead, Paul.
No, that's correct. And as Sally said, one of the nightmare, I think that was the word she used, but the impact of that word resonates with me, not necessarily the word itself. The getting BIBFRAME into our a BIBFRAME description into a MARC representation through conversion in our ILS has been a very difficult process. And we keep telling people that what the MARC that you're used to now is not the MARC of the future. You're going to see things in MARC that are totally unusual, or that certainly conform to the standard, but are not what you're used to. But that is one of our milestones, when we can successfully convert BIBFRAME descriptions into MARC descriptions. And at that point, the double keying can stop.
Thanks, Paul. You want to say something, Judith, too?
I just wanted to say something about the question that I keep seeing on the screen, the shift from the internal servers to cloud-based ones. slow down? No, it's faster. There was not a slowdown. It is much more efficient and faster, our processing times.
Awesome. Thanks for answering one more question. We are 15 minutes past the hour, so I'm afraid that we will have to stop the session now, but it was great. Thanks so much, Sally, Paul, and Judith, for sharing what LC has been doing and for showing the new BIBFRAME editor, which looks amazing. Please, there are like 14 more questions here that we are going to post on Slack. And I will invite Judith, Paul, and Sally to go into Slack and answer the questions there. Thanks, everybody, for really thoughtful questions and for staying engaged. And have a great conference.
Thank you.